Debbie from Lime Doodle Design, and thank you for joining me for Doodling with Debbie. Today I want to share with you my newfound love of mixed media layers. In this soft whites and pastels palette, it makes for a great backdrop for this sweet chickadee. This card would make a great Valentine's, but equally is generic enough to be sent at any time of the year. Before I get started, as this is my first video of the year, I wanted to wish you a fabulously creative, safe and healthy 2022. Right, onto the supplies I used. I wasn't sure if I was going to use all of these, but as it turns out I did. So there's the sweet layered chickadee, dotted heart and privet branch dies, the polka hearts stencil and the So Much Love stamp and die set. All of these products are listed and linked below for your convenience. I had this card in my mind, and for a change it actually turned out how I imagined. So let's get started. You could die cut the various elements of the chickadee and the heart die from either coloured card or pattern paper, but I like to create my own using distress inks and get a lovely variation in colour and patterns you get by dunking card into puddles of colour and drying it with a heat tool. I cut a few pieces of Fabriano Artistico cold press watercolour card to size and set to it. I googled what a chickadee looks like. We don't have them in the UK, but a cold tit is a similar bird. I saw the creamy body with hints of peach, the grey-brown of the wing, and then the deep black of the head and neck. To start, I used antique linen to get the cream base for the main body. For all of these colourways, I used Tim Holtz Distress Ink Minis, and I'm using a very simple technique here and adding some of the ink to a craft mat, spritzing it with water, and then placing the card in the puddle before drying the card. I repeated the dunking and drying process, and as you do so, you get lovely marks and swirls of colour. To add that peachy glow to the chest of the bird, I added in Tattered Rose Distress Ink. I did pull out tea dye ink too, but in the end didn't need the extra depth of colour. I wanted to keep the body of the bird nice and light, and the gorgeous tattered rose was just enough to add that extra warm glow without getting too intense. Moving on to the grey-brown wing, and for this I used pumice stone. I love this colour and the different colours you get from it as you dip and dry the card. I did add in a touch of frayed burlap, but honestly you didn't need it. Just pumice stone would have been more than sufficed. I did keep adding in more layers to this piece to get the deeper grey-brown to contrast with the light creamy body. Onto the head and neck piece. For this, the obvious choice was Black Soot Distress Ink. This is a powerful colour and you don't need much. I wanted the card to be dark in colour to represent the actual colours of the bird, but equally I did want to keep some variation in there. I didn't want it to be solid black. I repeated the dip and dry process until bit by bit the added layers got to where I wanted it. Now for the dotted heart die, I wanted, I thought, a warm but not too intense red. I picked out candied apple and repeated the process I had for the other three pieces. The thing is, later on you'll see that I don't use this colour. It was just too intense for my personal tastes, but I'll talk more about that later. So here you have the 4 pieces of card coloured with distress inks. I added the dotted heart die to the red piece and kept it in place with painter's tape. The layered chickadee die is 1 die for all the pieces, and so I took it in turns to run the die through my Gemini Junior die cutting machine with 1 piece at a time. I also die cut the privet branch die with ivory card. I ended up with a creamy white branch, a pinky red heart and 3 colourways of chickadee die cuts. I made up my bird with the creamy body, the grey-brown wing and the black head and neck pieces. I added the wing with foam tape, but for the head and neck I added them with Gina K Connect glue. I used the grey-brown beak and added that on, and then for the eye, there isn't a piece backing the body of the bird in order to keep the eye in place. And knowing that I would foam mount the bird to my card, I added foam tape over the back of the head and used the stickiness of the tape to keep the eye in place. Moving on to the greeting, and I love the large script Love in the So Much Love set, and it comes with a matching die too. Using ivory card that I treated with anti-static powder, I used Versamark ink to stamp the image. I sprinkled with antique gold embossing powder and heat set until the powder had melted and was giving a smooth finish. When cool, I align the matching die, which I held in place with painter's tape, before running through my die cutting machine. You'll see here how gorgeous that die looks when the light catches it. Here you can see that I kept playing around with the arrangement of the various pieces, but that red heart jarred with the other elements. For now though, I continued with the sentiment and stamped a coordinating greeting from the So Much Love set onto some of the black soot piece that was left over after die cutting the Chickadee. I used Versamark ink again after treating the card with anti-static powder, and this time I used white embossing powder before trimming out with a scalpel a metal-edged clear gridded ruler on a craft mat. I like how the colour has that same black but not quite full black variations and fits so well with the softness of the colour scheme, apart from that red heart. And so I took one of the watercolour pieces and used just Tattered Rose Distress ink. I followed the same process of dip and dry, and then once dry I die cut the dotted heart die from this piece. Oh yes, I was much happier by this point. I was starting to put the card together with a watercolour panel and a fog card base. Now comes the even messier part. If you don't like getting messy, then this next part might not be for you. But I love getting my hands in there and was in my element playing around with this background panel. I started by taking a book page from an old book. This book is a dictionary of English literature, and seeing as we were going for a romantic feel, I chose the page with William Shakespeare on it. You'll find old books like this in many a charity shop or antique fair. It may seem wrong to treat a book this way, but I've been using pages of this book in my art for a while, and for me it's given the book new life. I tore a piece of the page and adhered it to the watercolour panel with Gina K Connect glue. Then to soften the edges and create almost a misty look over the text, I used Dina Wiggly White Gesso. I started off with an old brush. You don't want to be using your nice brushes for this type of thing. But eventually I got in there with a palette knife for a much more textured, organic look, with scraped areas revealing more of the text and then thicker areas for contrast. Once dry, I took the Polka heart stencil and using just the hearts, I spread Tim Holtz Crackle texture paste over the stencil with a palette knife. I love how all these tone-on-tone textures create beautiful interest. The layers on layers of romantic text from old book paper, the crackle hearts, it all adds up to tell a story. If you like this sort of look, then you really should check out Lally Meal. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but she's an amazing mixed media artist. I love to see her art journaling pages. I added splatter with Tattered Rose and Pumice Stone Distress inks along with some white gouache. I can't see my love of splattering fading in 2022. Looking at this panel now, the top edge of the page was annoying me. It was too harsh a line, and so I took some crackle texture paste and used it to blur the line a little. I also added it into other places on the card too, and then once dry I went back in with the pink splatter from more of the Tattered Rose Distress ink. Here's a close-up of how that texture looks in the end. The book page, gesso, stencil crackle paste, extra crackle paste and splatter. I played around with arrangements of the die cuts and then started adhering them to an A2 card base cut and scored from fog card. First off, I added the panel with foam tape, and then using more foam tape, I added the PRIVET branch die cut. I'm still in love with white die cuts, especially with ones such as this branch, which have all the extra detail etched into them. Next, I added the two elements of the greeting, the large script gold embossed love die cut, along with a coordinating sentiment on black soot piece. Again, I used foam tape. You don't see me doing it here, but later on I went back in and added extra tape under some areas. That is the thing when adding lots of layers with foam tape. You want to ensure that each piece is on a level. I added the heart by tucking it in behind the love die cut and then finished off with the Chickadee. At this point I realised I'd missed a trick and not splattered the heart and bird's chest. I used my hand to cover the other elements and splattered a little white gouache. Finally, I added some eggshell pearls from Little Things from Lucy's cards and also a few Doris sequins, both of which I held in place with Gina K Connect glue. And that completes this sweet Chickadee card with lots of romantic mixed media layers to add interest. On the Simon Says Stamp blog, you'll find a coordinating blog post as well as details of the supplies I've used today. If you want to find me, I blog over at limedoodledesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.